I stood in the shadow of Nate Caldwell's office door, my fingers brushing the edge of my purse strap, the leather worn soft from years of nervous gripping. The Buckhead high-rise loomed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Atlanta's skyline sprawling like a chessboard where every move felt preordained. And I was no queen. The air smelled of polished wood and expensive cologne, a scent that clung to Nate like a second skin. His desk, a slab of mahogany, wide enough to land a small plane, dominated the room, and behind it, he sat, tie loosened just enough to signal the end of a long day, but not enough to suggest he'd lost control. He never did. "Becky," he said, his voice smooth as bourbon. "Sit down. We need to talk about Maggie." I hesitated, my flats sinking into the plush carpet as I crossed to the chair opposite him. It was too low, deliberately so, forcing me to look up at him like a petitioner before a king. Maggie Thornton's death had hit me 2 days ago. A phone call from her estate lawyer that left me dizzy. $12 million, a fortune I couldn't fathom, left me out of the blue. Nate had been her financial advisor for years, the man who turned her modest inheritance into a dynasty. And now, it seemed, he intended to manage mine too. "She was a hell of a woman," he continued, leaning back, his fingers steepled. "Smart but sentimental. That's why she picked you, I reckon. The housekeeper's daughter. Her little charity case." His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close enough to sting. "Problem is, Becky, money like that doesn't just sit in a bank account. It needs direction. It needs someone who knows what they're doing." I swallowed, my throat dry. I'd spent my life orbiting people like Nate. Men who wore tailored suits and spoke in absolutes. Men who assumed the world bent to their will because it always had. My mother had scrubbed Maggie's floors for 20 years, and I'd trailed behind her, a skinny kid with tangled hair, fetching iced tea or polishing silver. Maggie had been kind, slipping me books or $20 bills for school supplies. But I never imagined this. $12 million. It felt like a dream, or maybe a trap. "I can handle it," I said, the words sounding thinner than I'd hoped. "I'll figure it out." Nate chuckled, a low rumble that rolled across the desk like thunder. "Handle it? Sweetheart, you're a paralegal pulling 40 grand a year. You think you're ready to play in this league?" He slid a folder toward me, the paper crisp and heavy. "Power of attorney. Sign this, and I'll take care of everything. Investments, taxes, the whole mess. You won't have to lift a finger." I stared at the document, the black ink blurring slightly as my pulse quickened. His pen, a Mont Blanc, probably worth more than my car, rested beside it, waiting. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in, the hum of the air conditioner a distant roar in my ears. Nate's eyes, sharp and unyielding, pinned me in place. This wasn't an offer. It was a command. "I need time to think," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Time's a luxury you don't have," he said, leaning forward now, elbows on the desk. "This kind of money attracts vultures, Becky. You're not equipped to deal with them." "I am." I wanted to argue, to tell him I wasn't the naive girl he thought I was, but doubt gnawed at me. What did I know about wealth? I'd grown up in a duplex with peeling paint, counting quarters for laundry. Nate, with his corner office and his casual arrogance, knew this world. Its rules, its players. Maybe he was right. Maybe I'd drown without him. That night, alone in my cramped apartment, I found the letter. It was tucked in an envelope from Maggie's lawyer, separate from the will, handwritten in her elegant, looping script. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Dear Becky," it began. "Asterisk, you were always more than you knew. This money is yours, not just to keep, but to wield. Don't let them take it from you. Not Nate, not anyone. You're stronger than they think." Asterisk, I read it twice, then a third time, the words sinking into me like rain on parched ground. Maggie had seen something in me, something Nate couldn't or wouldn't. My fear didn't vanish, but it shifted, making room for something else, a spark, faint but insistent. I glanced at the power of attorney form sitting on my kitchen counter. Nate's signature already scrawled at the bottom, waiting for mine. My fingers tightened around the letter. He thought he'd already won. He was wrong. The fluorescent light above my kitchen table buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the chipped formica. I sat there, Maggie's letter still clutched in my hand, the edges crinkling under my tightening grip. Outside, Atlanta hummed with distant traffic, the city's pulse a low thrum that seeped through the thin walls of my apartment. The air smelled of stale coffee and the lingering grease from a takeout carton I hadn't bothered to toss. It was a far cry from Nate's polished office, with its gleaming surfaces and unspoken authority. But here, in this cramped space, I felt the weight of something shifting, something I couldn't yet name. I set the letter down, smoothing it flat against the table, my fingers tracing the loops of her handwriting. $12 million. The number rattled around in my skull, too big to hold on to, like trying to cup water in my hands. I'd spent the last 2 days reeling from the news, but it was Nate's voice that kept echoing louder. Smooth, condescending, certain I'd bend. That folder he'd slid across his desk, the power of attorney form, sat a few feet away on the counter, taunting me. I hadn't touched it since I'd brought it home, but its presence loomed, heavy as a judge's gavel. My phone buzzed, jolting me upright. The screen lit up with Nate's name, and my stomach twisted. I let it ring twice, 3 times, before my thumb hovered over the decline button. But then I stopped. If I dodged him now, he'd only push harder later. I swiped to answer, pressing the phone to my ear. "Becky," he said, no preamble, his tone clipped but warm, like a parent scolding a wayward kid. "You've had your night to think. Where are we at with that paperwork?" I glanced at the form, its pristine edges catching the light. "I'm still looking it over," I said, forcing my voice steady. "It's a lot to take in." A pause stretched across the line, long enough that I could hear the faint clink of ice in a glass on his end. "It's not complicated, sweetheart. You sign, I handle the rest. You don't want this dragging out. Trust me, the sharks are already circling." "Who's circling?" I asked, sharper than I meant to. "You're the only one I've heard from." He laughed, that same low rumble from his office, but it felt colder now, edged with something I couldn't place. "You're out of your depth, Becky. You think Maggie's estate is some fairy tale windfall? It's a target. Lawyers, creditors, cousins you didn't know she had. They'll all come knocking. I'm offering you a lifeline." I stood, pacing the narrow strip between my table and the sink, the linoleum cool under my bare feet. His words dug in, feeding the doubt that had been gnawing at me since I'd left his office. He was right. I didn't know this world. I'd spent my life scraping by, balancing rent and car repairs, while he brokered deals that could buy my entire neighborhood. But then my eyes fell on Maggie's letter again, her words cutting through the haze. "Don't let them take it from you." "I'll let you know tomorrow," I said, my voice firmer this time. "I need one more day." "Tomorrow's fine," he replied, too easily, and I could picture him leaning back in his chair, glass in hand, already counting his victory. "But don't wait too long. Money like this doesn't sit still." The call ended, and I dropped the phone onto the table, my breath coming faster than I'd expected. I sank back into the chair, staring at the letter as if it might speak again. Maggie hadn't just left me money, she'd left me a fight, and Nate wasn't waiting for me to catch up. He was moving pieces I couldn't even see. I pulled my laptop closer, the ancient thing wheezing as it powered on. My fingers hesitated over the keys before typing Nate Caldwell, Financial Advisor, Atlanta. The search results spilled out. Glossy headshots, articles about his firm, Ramsey and Company, glowing testimonials from clients with names I recognized from billboards and charity galas. But then, buried on the second page, a headline caught my eye. "Local advisor named in Thornton estate dispute." It was dated 3 years back. A minor squabble over fees with one of Maggie's nephews. Nate had won, of course. The nephew settled out of court. But the article hinted at something else, a pattern of control, a knack for turning clients into dependents. My pulse quickened as I clicked through more links, piecing together a picture I hadn't wanted to see. Nate didn't just manage money, he owned it and the people attached to it. I thought of his casual arrogance, the way he dismissed me as a paralegal playing dress-up. He didn't see me as a threat because he didn't see me at all. But Maggie had. I reread her letter, my eyes lingering on that last line. You're stronger than they think. It wasn't just encouragement, it was a warning. She'd known Nate longer than I had, trusted him with her fortune. Yet here she was, telling me to stand my ground. Why? A memory flickered, sharp and sudden. Maggie in her study, years ago, her silver hair catching the light as she pored over ledgers. I'd been 16, dropping off a stack of mail, when she looked up and said, "Numbers don't lie, Becky, but people do. Learn to spot the difference." I'd nodded, not understanding, but now it hit me like a freight train. She'd been preparing me, even then. I shoved the laptop aside and grabbed a notepad, my hands shaking as I started scribbling. Questions first. What did Nate stand to gain? How much control would that power of attorney give him? Then a plan, rough and unformed. Call the estate lawyer in the morning. Dig into the will's fine print. Find out what Nate wasn't telling me. The kitchen felt smaller now, the walls closing in with a tension I could taste. Bitter, electric, alive. I wasn't just shocked anymore. I was angry. Nate thought he could steamroll me, take what Maggie had given me because I was nobody, a housekeeper's daughter, a charity case. But he didn't know me, not the way Maggie did. I tore the top sheet off the pad, folding it into my purse next to her letter. Tomorrow I'd start fighting back. Not loud. Not yet. Just quiet, careful steps. The kind Nate wouldn't see coming. The morning sunlight slanted through the blinds of my apartment, cutting sharp lines across the kitchen table where my notepad lay open, its edges curling from the night's humidity. I'd barely slept, my mind churning with Maggie's words and Nate's voice, the two tangling like wires I couldn't untie. My coffee sat cold in its mug, untouched since I'd brewed it an hour ago, the bitter smell mixing with the faint mildew that clung to this old building. Outside, the city woke up slow, a car horn, a dog barking, the distant rumble of the MARTA train. But inside, it felt like the air was holding its breath, waiting for me to move. I decided sometime around 3 a.m., when the shadows on my ceiling started looking like answers, that I couldn't face Nate alone. Not yet. I needed someone who knew the game, someone who could see the board I was stumbling across blind. Lily Brooks was that person. She'd been Maggie's paralegal years back, before I'd taken a similar job at a rival firm, and I remember her from the Thornton house. Sharp eyes, sharper tongue, always carrying a stack of files like they were armor. If anyone could help me unravel Nate's plan, it was her. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to her number, hesitating only a second before texting. Asterisk, can we meet? Urgent. Decatur, 10 a.m. Asterisk, a reply pinged back, almost instantly. Asterisk, Square Cafe. Don't be late. Asterisk, no questions, no small talk. Just Lily. Straight to the point. My chest loosened a fraction, though the knot of nerves didn't budge. The cafe was a 20-minute drive, and I spent every second of it gripping the wheel, my knuckles white against the cracked vinyl. Atlanta's morning traffic snarled around me, a mess of brake lights and exhaust, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Nate's call, his easy confidence, the way he'd said sharks like he wasn't one of them. By the time I pulled into Decatur, the quaint streets lined with brick storefronts and blooming crepe myrtles felt like a lie, too peaceful for the storm brewing inside me. Square Cafe, set nestled between a bookstore and a bakery, its weathered sign swinging faintly in the breeze. Inside, the air smelled of roasted coffee and cinnamon, a warm hum of chatter rising from the scattered tables. Lily was already there, tucked into a corner booth, her dark hair pulled back tight, a laptop open in front of her. She didn't look up as I slid into the seat across from her, but her fingers paused over the keys, a silent acknowledgement. "You look like hell," she said finally, her voice low and dry, eyes flicking up to meet mine. They were hazel, sharp as ever, cutting through the haze I'd been carrying since Maggie's death. "Thanks," I muttered, setting my purse on the table, Maggie's letter folded inside like a talisman. "I feel worse." A waitress swung by, dropping off a black coffee for me without asking, and I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into my palms. Lily leaned back, crossing her arms, waiting. She wasn't one for pleasantries, never had been. I remember her barking orders at delivery guys back at Maggie's, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Nate Caldwell," I started, keeping my voice low, though the nearest table was deep in their own conversation. "He's trying to lock me into a power of attorney. Maggie left me $12 million, and he's acting like it's already his." Lily's eyebrows lifted, just a fraction, but her expression didn't shift. $12 million, she repeated, tasting the number. "That's a hell of a bequeathment. And Nate's circling already? Figures." "You know him?" I asked, leaning forward, my pulse ticking up. "By reputation." She tapped a fingernail against the table, a slow, deliberate rhythm. "He's a fixture at Ramsey and Company. Big fish, bigger ego. Likes to play savior to widows and orphans, then siphons their accounts dry with management fees. Maggie never let him get too close, though. She kept him on a leash." I frowned, the pieces not quite fitting. She trusted him enough to build her fortune. She trusted his math. Lily corrected, her tone sharp. "Not his soul. Maggie was old school, paranoid, meticulous. She'd have my ass if I filed a form late, but she always double-checked Nate's numbers herself. Said he had slippery hands." Slippery hands. The phrase stuck, sinking into me like a splinter. I thought of his office, that Mont-Blanc pen, the way he'd slid the folder across his desk with such casual certainty. My fingers tightened around the mug. He's pressuring me to sign. Says I can't handle it alone. "Of course he does." Lily snorted, a sound halfway between amusement and disdain. "You're fresh meat, Becky. A paralegal with no trust fund pedigree. Suddenly sitting on a pile of cash. To him, you're a mark begging to be fleeced." Her words stung, but they weren't wrong. I'd felt it in his office. The way he looked at me, like I was a child playing dress-up in Maggie's world. Doubt crept in again, cold and familiar, whispering that maybe he was right. Maybe I was out of my depth. But then I remembered Maggie's letter, her looping script burning behind my eyes. "You're stronger than they think." I pulled the envelope from my purse and slid it across the table. "She left me this, too. Read it." Lily unfolded the letter, her eyes scanning the lines with a lawyer's precision. When she finished, she set it down, her gaze locking onto mine. "She knew he'd try something," she said, quieter now, almost respectful. "This isn't just money, Becky. It's a gauntlet." "A gauntlet," I echoed, my voice catching. "She's daring you to fight for it." Lily tapped the paper once, then leaned back. "Nate's not the type to back off easy. That power of attorney, it's step one. He'll bury you in paperwork, tie up the estate in fees and delays until you're begging him to take it off your hands. I've seen it before." My stomach lurched, the coffee turning sour in my throat. "So what do I do?" "You don't sign," she said flatly. "Not a damn thing. Stall him. Tell him you're getting a second opinion. Hell, tell him you're joining a convent if it buys you time. Meanwhile, we dig. The will, the estate docs, his firm's history. There's dirt somewhere and I'll find it." "We?" I blinked, caught off guard. She smirked, the first real crack in her armor. "You think I'd let Nate Caldwell screw over Maggie's legacy? I owe her that much." Relief washed over me, warm and unsteady, but it didn't last. The cafe door swung open, and a man in a gray suit stepped in. his eyes sweeping the room before landing on us. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jawline that looked carved from stone. Someone who didn't belong in a place this cozy. Lily's smirk vanished, her posture stiffening. Problem? I whispered, my heart kicking up a notch. Maybe, she muttered, her gaze tracking him as he ordered at the counter. Or maybe I'm paranoid. Either way, we're not doing this here. Finish your coffee. We'll take it to my office. I nodded, gulping down the lukewarm brew, my hands trembling slightly as I set the mug down. The man didn't look our way again, but the air felt heavier now, thick with a tension I couldn't shake. Lily was already on her feet, laptop tucked under her arm, her stride purposeful as she led me out into the bright morning. The street outside buzzed with life. Shoppers, strollers, a busker strumming a guitar, but I barely noticed. My mind was racing, piecing together Nate's plan, Maggie's warning, Lily's resolve. I'd come here hoping for clarity, but what I'd found was a fight. One I wasn't sure I could win. Not yet. Back in my car, following Lily's taillights toward her office, I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles paling again. Nate thought he had me cornered, a scared little nobody too weak to push back. But he didn't know about Lily. He didn't know about Maggie's letter. And he sure as hell didn't know what I was capable of when I stopped doubting myself. The road stretched ahead, narrow and uncertain, but for the first time since that phone call about the inheritance, I felt something solid beneath me. A spark, a foothold. I wasn't ready to face him head on, not today. But I was done running. Lily's office was a stark contrast to Nate's polished kingdom. A cramped second-floor walk-up above a dry cleaner's in East Atlanta. The kind of place where the stairs creaked underfoot and the air carried a faint whiff of bleach and dust. I followed her up, my sneakers scuffing the worn wood, the narrow hallway pressing in like a tunnel. The door at the top bore a brass plate. Brooks Legal Services. Its edges tarnished green, and when she pushed it open, the hinges groaned as if they hadn't been oiled in years. Inside, the space was a chaos of stacked files and mismatched furniture. A single window, letting in a sliver of gray light that barely reached the corners. It wasn't impressive, but it felt real, gritty, unpretentious. A place where secrets could hide without pretense. She dropped her laptop onto a desk buried under papers, the thud echoing in the small room, and gestured to a chair that looked like it had been salvaged from a garage sale. Sit, she said, already digging through a drawer. I obeyed, the cushion sagging beneath me, my purse clutched tight in my lap. My hands still trembled from the cafe, from that man in the gray suit whose glance had felt like a blade across my spine. I didn't know if he was Nate's or just some random guy, but the uncertainty gnawed at me, sharpening the edges of my fear. Lily pulled out a notepad and a pen, cheap Bic, not Montblanc, and fixed me with that hazel stare, all business now. All right, Becky, let's break this down. Nate wants control. You've got Maggie's letter telling you to fight. What's your next move? I opened my mouth, then closed it, the words tangling in my throat. What was my next move? 2 days ago, I'd been a paralegal drowning in student loans. My biggest worry, a late rent check. Now I was sitting on $12 million, with a shark like Nate circling and Maggie's ghost whispering in my ear. The weight of it pressed down, heavy and suffocating, and for a moment I wanted to bolt. Back to my apartment, back to the life where no one expected me to be anything more than I'd always been. But then I saw it again, in my mind's eye. Nate leaning across his desk, that folder sliding toward me, his voice dripping with condescension. You're out of your depth, Becky. The memory sparked something hot and jagged inside me, a flicker of anger chasing away the fear. He thought I'd fold. He thought I'd sign and thank him for it. And that, more than the money, more than Maggie's letter, was what made me stay in that creaky chair. I'm not signing, I said, my voice low but steady, surprising even me. Not now, not ever. He's not getting a damn thing. Lily's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Good. That's step one. Step 2 is figuring out what he's hiding. Guys like Nate don't push this hard unless there's something in it for them, something big. I nodded, my mind racing back to that article I'd found last night, the Thornton estate dispute. I dug up something online, I said, pulling my phone from my purse. A fight with one of Maggie's nephews years ago. Nate won, but it said he's got a history of controlling clients. Slippery hands, Lily muttered, scribbling on her pad. Matches what I know. He's not just after fees, Becky. Power of attorney gives him the keys to your kingdom. Investments, accounts, everything. He could drain you slow, bleed you dry over years, and you'd never see it coming. The room felt colder suddenly, the draft from the window snaking under my collar. I picture myself 10 years from now, broke, clueless, wondering where it all went, while Nate sat in his high-rise, sipping bourbon paid for with my inheritance. My stomach churned, a mix of nausea and fury, and I gripped the chair's arms to steady myself. So how do we stop him? We don't stop him yet, Lily said, her pen tapping the pad. We outmaneuver him. First, I'll pull the will from the probate records, see what's buried in the language. Maggie was sharp. She might have left you a weapon we don't know about. Second, you keep him guessing. Stall him, like I said. Tell him you're consulting someone, don't name me, and watch how he reacts. I swallowed, the plan taking shape in my head, jagged and unpolished, but real. And then we hit back. She leaned forward, her voice dropping. Nate's not invincible. He's got enemies, skeletons. I've got contacts, old clients, court clerks, a PI who owes me a favor. We find the dirt and we use it. The word we hung in the air, solid as the desk between us. I wasn't alone anymore, not completely, and that realization steadied me, like a hand on my shoulder when I'd been free-falling. But it didn't erase the tension coiling in my chest, the sense that every step I took was onto thinner ice. Nate wasn't just a bully. He was a predator, and I was still learning how to bare my teeth. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of traffic outside, until Lily flipped her notepad shut. "You're sure about this?" she asked, her tone softer now, almost cautious. "Once we start, there's no backing out. He'll come at you harder when he realizes you're not playing along." I thought of Maggie, her silver hair, her quiet strength, the way she'd looked at me that day in her study, like she saw something worth betting on. I thought of my mother, scrubbing floors to put me through school, her hands raw and red by the end of every week. And I thought of Nate, his smug certainty that I'd crumble. My fear was still there, a cold pulse in my veins, but it wasn't alone anymore. There was something else now, a quiet, burning resolve, fragile but growing. "I'm sure," I said, meeting her gaze. "He's not taking this from me." Lily nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes, and reached for her phone. "Then let's get to work. I'll call my guy at the courthouse. You go home, keep that power of attorney locked up, and wait for Nate's next move. He'll call tonight. I'd bet my last dollar on it." She was right. I felt it in my bones, the inevitability of his voice on the other end of the line, smooth and relentless. But this time I wouldn't flinch. I stood, slinging my purse over my shoulder, the weight of Maggie's letter a steady pressure against my side. The office felt smaller as I turned to leave, the walls tight with the promise of what was coming. Power, struggle, a fight I hadn't asked for but couldn't walk away from. Back in my car, the engine sputtered to life, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the cracked dashboard. The city sprawled beyond the windshield, a maze of glass and steel where Nate reigned, and I'd always been invisible. But not anymore. I pulled out my phone and typed a quick message to him. Asterisk still reviewing the docs, getting a second opinion. Talk soon. Asterisk, my thumb hovered over send, my heart pounding. Then I pressed it. The text whooshed away, a tiny grenade lobbed into his world. I drove home through the thickening afternoon, the sky bruising with clouds, my mind a storm of its own. Lily's words echoed, Asterisk, he'll come at you harder, asterisk. And I knew she was right. But so was Maggie. I was stronger than he thought, stronger than I'd thought. And that truth was a blade I could wield. The first cut was mine to make. That night, as the rain started tapping against my apartment windows, my phone lit up. Nate's name glowed on the screen, and I let it ring once, twice, before picking up. My hand was steady now, my voice ready. "Becky," he said, his tone tighter than before, a crack in the bourbon smoothness. "What's this about a second opinion?" I smiled into the dark, small and sharp, and took a breath. The game had changed. The rain battered my apartment windows, a relentless drumbeat that matched the pulse hammering in my chest. Nate's voice crackled through the phone, sharp edge beneath that polished veneer, and I could almost see him, leaning forward in some sleek home office, glass in hand, the Atlanta skyline a glittering backdrop beyond his shoulder. His question hung in the air, taut as a tripwire. What's this about a second opinion? I'd tossed the grenade with that text, and now the explosion was coming. I steadied my breath, the dark of my living room wrapping around me like armor, and let the silence stretch just long enough to make him squirm. "I'm not rushing into anything," I said finally, my voice low, deliberate, each word a stone dropped into still water. "This is too big, Nate. I need to be sure." "Sure of what?" His tone tightened, a faint snap beneath the smoothness, like ice cracking under weight. "I've laid it out for you, Becky. You're sitting on a fortune, and it's slipping through your fingers every minute you hesitate. A second opinion from who? Some strip mall lawyer who'll charge you by the hour to tell you what I already know." I paced to the window, the glass cold against my palm as I pressed it there, staring out at the rain-slick street below. The streetlights bled into puddles, a hazy glow that mirrored the churn in my gut. He was good, damn good, twisting my caution into weakness, painting himself as the only lifeline in a sea of sharks. But I'd spent the day with Lily, her cramped office a war room of scribbled plans and grim determination. And I wasn't the same Becky he dismissed in his high-rise. Not anymore. "Doesn't matter who," I said, keeping my voice even, though my free hand clenched into a fist. "Maggie left this to me, not you. I owe it to her to do it right." A beat of silence, then a chuckle, low, dry, the sound of a man recalculating his play. "Maggie was sentimental, I'll give her that. Picking you as her last big gesture. Noble, sure, but naive. You think she'd want you fumbling this alone when I've got 30 years steering her ship." The jab landed, sharp and familiar, pricking at the doubt I'd carried since that first call about the inheritance. I'd spent my life on the edges, fetching coffee for attorneys, filing motions for cases I'd never argue, while men like Nate owned the room. But then I saw her letter again in my mind, tucked safe in my purse on the counter. "Don't let them take it from you. Sentiment or not, Maggie had chosen me, and that wasn't naivety. It was a vote I couldn't ignore." "I'm not fumbling," I shot back, the words spilling out hotter than I'd planned. "I'm thinking, and I don't need your permission to do it." The line went quiet, and I could feel him on the other end, shifting gears, the predator sizing up prey that wasn't running as expected. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, coaxing, a velvet glove over the steel. "All right, Becky, take your time, but don't kid yourself. This isn't a game you win by stalling. Call me when you're ready. I'll be here." He hung up before I could respond, the sudden silence louder than the rain. I dropped the phone onto the couch, my legs shaky as I sank beside it, adrenaline buzzing through me like static. That was step one, buying time, just like Lily said. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tightrope, and I was one gust away from falling. The next morning, the sky had cleared, but the air still hung heavy, thick with humidity that clung to my skin as I pulled into the lot outside Ramsey and Company. Nate's firm towered above Buckhead, all glass and steel, a monument to money and men who wielded it like a weapon. I'd been here before, cowed by its weight, but today was different. Today I had a plan, or at least the jagged edges of one. Lily had spent half the night digging through probate filings, texting me cryptic updates. Asterisk Will's clean so far. Checking Nate's past deals. Stay sharp. Asterisk sharp was all I had left, and I gripped it tight as I stepped into the lobby. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was a slow ascent into enemy territory. The mirrored walls throwing back a version of me I barely recognized. Hair pulled back, blouse ironed, eyes hard with something new. The doors slid open, and there was Nate's world again. The mahogany desk, the skyline view, the faint musk of power that hit me like a physical thing. His assistant, a sleek blonde with a headset, waved me through without a word, and I pushed open his office door, my pulse a steady drumbeat in my ears. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, his suit jacket draped over a chair like he'd already won the day. He turned as I entered, a smile flickering across his face. Warm, practiced, a salesman's charm, but his eyes were cold, assessing. "Becky," he said, gesturing to the chair I'd sat in last time, the low one that made me feel small. "Good to see you. Coffee?" "No, thanks," I said, staying on my feet, clutching my purse like a shield. The room felt tighter today, the air thick with unspoken stakes, and I caught a whiff of his cologne, cedar and leather, sharp enough to cut. "I won't be long." His smile tightened, just a fraction, and he leaned against the desk, arms crossed, casual but coiled. "Your text had me curious. Second opinion, huh? Find anything interesting?" "Not yet." I lied, meeting his gaze, my voice steady despite the sweat prickling my palms. "Just making sure I understand what I'm signing. You said it yourself, this is big. I can't afford mistakes." He nodded, slow and deliberate, like a teacher humoring a slow student. "Smart, but you're overthinking it. This," he tapped a folder on his desk, identical to the one he'd given me, "is your safety net. You sign and I handle the mess. No mistakes, no regrets." I glanced at the folder, its crisp edges mocking me, and felt that spark flare again. Anger. Yes, but something deeper. A hunger I hadn't named until now. It wasn't just about keeping the money. It was about taking back what he assumed was his. My fingers tightened on my purse strap, and I took a step closer, close enough to see the faint lines around his eyes, the wear of a man who'd fought dirtier battles than this. "I've been wondering something," I said, my tone light, almost curious, though my heart slammed against my ribs. "Why the rush? 12 million's a lot, sure, but you've got clients worth 10 times that. What's in this for you?" The question hung there, sharp and sudden, and for a split second, his mask slipped. Not much, just a flicker in his jaw, a tightening of his lips. Then it was gone, smoothed over with that bourbon laugh. "What's in it for me? Loyalty, Becky. Maggie was family to me. 20 years, her trust, her legacy. I owe her this." "Loyalty," I echoed, tasting the word, letting it sit heavy between us. "Funny, she never mentioned you that way. She talked about her garden, her books, even me but you, just the guy who moved her money around." His eyes narrowed, a glint of something dangerous flashing through them, and the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in with a tension I could feel in my bones. "You didn't know her like I did," he said, his voice low, edged with a warning I hadn't heard before. "She was a dreamer, not a fighter. That's why she needed me. And it's why you do." I held his stare, my breath shallow, the air electric with the unspoken, his confidence, my defiance, the ghost of Maggie between us. He was right about one thing. She'd been a dreamer, soft in ways I'd loved her for, but he'd missed the steel beneath it. She'd seen him, weighed him, and her letter was proof. Slippery hands, Lily had said, and I saw it now. The way he leaned into me, the casual ownership in his posture, like I was already his to steer. "Maybe," I said, stepping back, breaking the spell. "But I'm not her. I'll let you know when I decide. I turned for the door, my legs unsteady but moving, and his voice followed me, smooth again, unruffled. Don't take too long, Becky. Time's a luxury you're burning through. Out in the hall, the elevator doors closed behind me, and I slumped against the wall, my breath coming fast, ragged. The confrontation had shaken me more than I'd expected. Not his words, but the weight of what I'd glimpsed. His hunger, raw and unguarded. A man who didn't just want control but craved it like air. Loyalty? That was a lie he told himself. And maybe Maggie had known it all along. Back in my car, I pulled out my phone and texted Lily. Asterisk just left Nate's. He's pushing hard. Anything yet? Asterisk a reply buzzed back quick. Asterisk found a thread. Old client. Bad blood. Meet me tonight. We're close. Asterisk my hands trembled as I typed okay. The pieces shifting. The board tilting in ways I couldn't yet see. The drive home was a blur of traffic and rain-threatened skies, my mind spinning with what I'd learned. Not from what Nate said, but from what he didn't. He wasn't just after fees or a fat commission. This was personal, a prize he'd been eyeing longer than I'd realized. Maggie's legacy wasn't just money to him. It was power, a final notch in his belt, and I was the only thing standing in his way. By the time I parked outside my building, the resolve I'd felt with Lily had hardened, a quiet fire stoked by every condescending word he'd thrown at me. I wasn't just stalling anymore, I was planning, watching, learning the game he thought I couldn't play. Maggie had seen it in me, and now I was starting to see it too. A strength I'd buried under doubt, will to fight not just for the money, but for myself. The phone sat silent in my lap, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way. Nate would call again, press harder, and when he did, I'd be ready. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the ring. The streetlights flickered outside my apartment, their weak glow slicing through the dusk as I sat on the couch, my phone a cold weight in my hand. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a damp stillness that pressed against the windows, thick and suffocating. My living room felt smaller tonight, the chipped paint on the walls and the sagging cushions beneath me a stark reminder of the world I'd always known. One Nate assumed I'd never escape. But the silence wasn't peace. It was a coiled spring, and I could feel it tightening with every tick of the clock on the shelf. He'd call again. I knew it like I knew my own name. My purse sat on the coffee table, Maggie's letter peeking out from the top, its edges worn from my restless fingers. I'd read it again after texting Lily, the words sinking deeper each time. You're stronger than they think. It wasn't just encouragement anymore. It was a lifeline, a thread I clung to as the stakes climbed higher. Nate's voice from that morning in his office echoed in my skull. Asterisk time's a luxury you're burning through asterisk. And I could still see the glint in his eyes, the hunger he hadn't bothered to hide. He wasn't just playing me. He was hunting me, and I'd stepped right into his crosshairs. The phone buzzed, a sharp jolt that snapped me upright. Nate's name glowed on the screen, and my pulse kicked into overdrive, a drumbeat loud enough to drown out the hum of the refrigerator. I let it ring once, twice, my thumb hovering over the answer button as I grabbed the cheap voice recorder I'd dug out of a drawer. An old thing from my paralegal days, scratched and battered but still functional. Lily's text from an hour ago flashed in my mind. Asterisk if he calls, record it. Every word's a weapon. Asterisk my hand shook as I pressed the red button, the tiny light blinking on, then swiped to answer. Becky, he said, his voice sliding through the line like oil, smooth and deliberate. You're keeping me on my toes. I like that. Decided yet? I stood, pacing the narrow strip between the couch and the TV, the carpet rough under my bare feet. The recorder sat on the table, its mic pointed up, catching every breath, every inflection. Not yet, I said, keeping my tone neutral, though my chest felt like it might crack open. Still thinking. Like I said, I'm being careful. Careful, smart, he replied. But there was an edge now, an impatience threading through the warmth. But there's a line between careful and paralyzed, sweetheart. You're teetering on it. What's holding you up? The question was a trap, baited and waiting, and I could picture him, leaning back in some leather chair, the city sprawling beyond his window, his fingers drumming a rhythm of control. The air in my apartment thickened, heavy with the weight of his expectation, and I glanced at the recorder, its lights steady and unblinking. This was it, the moment Lily had prepped me for, the chance to turn his own game against him. I told you, I said, my voice firmer now, a steel I hadn't known I had. I'm getting a second opinion. Someone who doesn't have a stake in this. You're too close, Nate. I need perspective. A pause, long and loaded, and when he spoke again, the bourbon smoothness had frayed, a crack exposing something raw underneath. Too close? Becky, I've been in this game since you were in pigtails. You think some outsider's gonna see what I see? You're sitting on a powder keg, taxes, legal fees. Predators who'll smell that money from a mile away. I'm the only one who can shield you. Shield me. I shot back, the words slipping out before I could stop them, fueled by the memory of his desk, his pen, his casual ownership of my future. Or lock me in. That power of attorney isn't a shield, Nate. It's a leash. I'm not blind. The line went dead quiet, and I froze mid-step, my breath caught in my throat. I'd pushed too far, tipped my hand, and now the room felt like it was tilting, the walls leaning in with a pressure I couldn't shake. Then he laughed, not the low rumble I'd heard before, but something sharper, colder, a sound that sent a shiver racing down my spine. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, he said, his tone shifting, less coaxing now, more calculating. But you're still green, Becky. You think you've got me figured out. That document keeps you safe, keeps the vultures off your back. Without it, you're a lamb in a slaughterhouse. Sign it, and we're done playing. My eyes locked on the recorder, its light a tiny beacon in the dimness, and I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sandpaper. He was doubling down, leaning into me, with every ounce of his weight, and I could feel it, the crush of his certainty, the way he wielded power like a blade. But beneath it, I heard something else, a flicker of desperation, a man who needed me to bend more than he'd let on. Why? What was he chasing that made this so personal? I'm not playing, I said, stepping closer to the table, my voice low and steady despite the tremor in my hands. This isn't a game to me, Nate. It's mine. Maggie gave it to me, not you. And I'm not signing anything until I know exactly what you're getting out of it. Another silence, heavier this time, and I could almost hear him recalibrating, the gears turning behind those sharp eyes I'd faced that morning. When he spoke, his voice was tight, stripped of pretense, a warning wrapped in velvet. You're digging a hole, Becky. Keep asking questions, and you might not like what you find. I'm offering you a way out. Take it or don't, but don't say I didn't warn you. The call ended with a click, abrupt and final, and I stood there, staring at the phone as the recorder whirred softly, capturing the echo of his threat. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the couch, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The room spun, the shadows stretching long and jagged across the floor, and for a moment I wanted to run, back to the life where no one cared what I did, where $12 million didn't hang over me like a guillotine. But then I looked at the recorder, its lights still glowing, and something shifted. I'd caught him. His words, his tone, the slip of a man who'd underestimated me one too many times. My hand steadied as I stopped the recording, the faint click loud in the stillness. I played it back, his voice filling the room again, every syllable a brick in the wall I was building against him. You're digging a hole. Don't say I didn't warn you. It wasn't just pressure. It was a confession, a crack in the armor Lily could pry open. I grabbed my phone and texted her. Asterisk got it. He's rattled. Threatened me on tape. Asterisk, her reply buzzed back fast. Asterisk perfect. Bring it tomorrow. Ramsey and Company, 9 a.m. We end this. Asterisk, my heart pounded, a mix of fear and fire, as I clutched the recorder tighter. Tomorrow, the final meeting. The moment Nate's scheme would unravel, or mine would. The apartment felt different now. Less a cage and more a war room, the dim light casting my shadow sharp against the wall. I stood and walked to the window, the city sprawling beyond the glass, its towers glinting like teeth. Nate's world, his office, his rules, his power, loomed out there, waiting to swallow me whole. But I wasn't the scared girl he pegged me for, not anymore. Maggie's letter had woken me, Lily had armed me, and now I had his voice, trapped and damning, in my hands. Sleep wouldn't come easy tonight, I knew that much. The weight of what was coming pressed down, a storm building inside me, equal parts dread and resolve. I'd face him in his own lair, with his own words as my weapon, and whatever happened, I wouldn't flinch. Not this time. The housekeeper's daughter was done bowing. Outside, the city hummed, oblivious to the battle lines I'd drawn. Inside, I sat back down, the recorder beside me, and waited for dawn. The morning broke over Atlanta with a gray, restless sky, the kind that promised rain but held back just to keep you guessing. I stood in my cramped bathroom, staring into the mirror, the fluorescent light flickering above me like a bad omen. My reflection looked back, pale, hollow-eyed, the lines of last night's sleeplessness etched deep. But there was something else there too, a glint of steel I hadn't seen before. My hands gripped the sink, steadying me as I took a slow breath, the air tasting of damp tile and the faint tang of my own nerves. Today was it. The final meeting at Ramsey and Company. Nate's scheme would either crumble, or I'd lose everything Maggie had given me. I slipped the recorder into my purse, its weight a quiet anchor beside her letter, and pulled on my coat. A thrift store find, navy and threadbare. Nothing like the tailored suits I'd face today. The drive to Buckhead was a blur, the city waking up around me in fits and starts, horns blaring, pedestrians darting through crosswalks, the skyline looming closer with every mile. My stomach churned, a mix of cold coffee and raw anticipation, but my hands stayed steady on the wheel. Lily's text from an hour ago burned in my mind. Asterisk 9 a.m. sharp. Bring the tape. We've got him. Asterisk I didn't know what she'd found. Not yet. But her certainty was a lifeline I clung to as I pulled into the parking garage beneath Nate's tower. The lobby hit me like a fist. Marble floors gleaming under chandeliers. The air sharp with polish and privilege. A world that didn't bend for people like me. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor was silent, save for the hum of the machinery and the thud of my own pulse. I clutched my purse tighter, the recorder's edges pressing into my palm through the fabric, a reminder of the weapon I carried. When the doors slid open, I stepped out into Nate's domain, the familiar scent of cedar and leather washing over me, heavy and suffocating. His assistant barely glanced up, just nodded toward the conference room down the hall, her headset blinking like a warning light. The room was a cathedral of power, long and narrow, with a glass wall framing the city like a trophy, a polished oak table stretching the length of it, surrounded by leather chairs that cost more than my rent. Nate stood at the far end, his back to me, hands clasped behind him as he gazed out at the skyline. He didn't turn as I entered, but I felt his presence fill the space. Broad shoulders in a charcoal suit, the casual authority of a man who owned every inch of this building. Two others flanked the table. A wiry man in glasses, scribbling on a legal pad. His lawyer, I guessed. And Lily, perched at the near end, her laptop open, her posture rigid with focus. She met my eyes, a quick nod, and I slid into the chair beside her, my purse thudding softly against the wood. "You're late," Nate said finally, his voice smooth as ever, cutting through the silence without effort. He turned, his gaze landing on me, sharp and unreadable, then flicked to Lily with a faint smirk. "And you brought company. Brooke's right. Maggie's old errand girl. Cute." Lily didn't flinch, her fingers pausing over her keys. "Errand girl who knows your playbook, Caldwell. Sit down. We've got business." The air tightened, a coil of tension winding through the room, and I felt it in my chest. Pressure building, hot and electric. Nate's smirk held, but his eyes narrowed, a predator sizing up a new threat. He eased into the chair at the head of the table, leaning back with that same effortless control, his fingers steepled. "Business," he echoed, his tone light but laced with venom. "All right, Becky, you've had your little adventure. Second opinions, late-night epiphanies. What's it gonna be?" I swallowed, my throat dry as dust, and glanced at Lily. Her nod was subtle, a signal to move, and I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing Maggie's letter before closing around the recorder. I set it on the table, the scratched plastic stark against the polished wood, and pressed play. Nate's voice spilled out, crisp and damning, filling the room like smoke. "Asterisk, you're digging a hole, Becky. Keep asking questions, and you might not like what you find." Asterisk, the threat hung there, raw and exposed, and I watched his face, his jaw tightening, his eyes flickering, just for a second, before the mask slid back into place. "Nice trick," he said, leaning forward, his voice low and steady. "But a recording doesn't change facts. You're out of your league, sweetheart. That tape's a tantrum, not evidence." "Is it?" Lily cut in, her voice sharp enough to slice through his calm. She slid a stack of papers across the table, the rustle loud in the stillness. "Then explain these. Client records from Ramsey and Company, 2018. A widow in Roswell. 8 million in assets. Handed you power of attorney, and 2 years later, she's broke, while your firm's billing fees quadruple. Sound familiar?" The wiry lawyer stiffened, his pen freezing mid-scrawl, but Nate didn't blink. He glanced at the papers, then back at Lily, his smile thinning. "Old news. She signed off on every dime. Poor decisions, not my fault. You've got nothing." "Nothing." Lily tapped her laptop, pulling up a grainy photo, a bank statement, dates and figures glowing on the screen. "Then how's this? Offshore account, tied to a shell company you own. Deposits match the widow's losses, down to the day. And here." She flipped another page. "A complaint from Maggie's nephew, 2022. Same pattern. Control, drain, discard. You didn't just manage Maggie's money, Nate. You were setting her up for the same play, until she died and left it to Becky." The room tilted, the air growing thick and heavy, pressing against my ribs. I stared at the papers, the numbers swimming into focus, proof cold and hard, of what I'd suspected but couldn't name. Nate wasn't just greedy. He was a thief, a spider spinning webs around anyone who trusted him. My hands clenched under the table, nails digging into my palms as the weight of it hit me. Maggie had known. She'd seen through him, and that's why she'd picked me. Not sentiment, but strategy, a last move to break his grip. Nate's laugh broke the silence, sharp and hollow, ricocheting off the glass walls. "You're reaching, Brooks. That's circumstantial at best. Parlor tricks for a probate judge. Becky, you buying this? She's bluffing to scare you into keeping me out." I looked at him, really looked, past the suit, the charm, the bourbon voice, and saw the cracks, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, the way his fingers twitched against the table. He was rattled, cornered, and for the first time, I felt the ground shift beneath us, tilting in my favor. My fear was still there, a cold pulse in my veins, but was drowned out by something louder, a quiet, burning fury that had been building since he'd slid that folder across his desk. "I'm not scared," I said, my voice steady, rising from somewhere deep. "I'm done listening to you. Maggie didn't trust you, and neither do I. You're not touching her money or me." His eyes locked on mine, dark and dangerous, and for a moment I saw the real Nate. Not the polished advisor, but the man who'd clawed his way to this table, who'd do anything to keep it. "You think you've won," he said, his tone low, a growl beneath the words. "Walk away from me, and you'll drown in this, Becky. Lawyers, audits, the IRS, they'll bury you. I'm your only shot." No. I shot back. Standing now, my chair scraping against the floor. You're finished. That tape, those records, they're not tricks. They're enough to drag you into court, and I'll do it. Sign the divorce papers, Nate. Let go of her estate. Or I'll make sure everyone knows what you are. The word divorce landed like a bomb. A slip I hadn't planned, but it fit. Severing him from Maggie's legacy, from me, from the power he craved. His lawyer jolted upright, papers scattering, but Nate just stared, his face a mask of stone cracking at the edges. The room pulsed with silence, the city beyond the glass indifferent to the war we'd waged in here. Lily stood beside me, her hand on my arm, steadying me as she gathered her files. "We're done here," she said, her voice cutting through the haze. "You've got 24 hours to sign off, Caldwell, or we file. Fraud, coercion, pick your poison." He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched us as we turned for the door. His gaze a weight I felt down to my bones. The hallway stretched ahead, the elevator a distant hum, and my legs trembled as we walked, the adrenaline crashing through me like a wave. I'd done it, faced him, exposed him, but the victory tasted bitter, laced with the dread of what he might do next. In the elevator, Lily squeezed my shoulder, her voice quiet but firm. "You were brilliant. He's got no moves left." I nodded, my throat too tight to answer, and clutched my purse, the recorder still warm against my side. The doors opened to the lobby, and I stepped out, the marble cold under my feet, the air sharp and free. Nate's tower loomed above, but it didn't own me. Not anymore. Maggie's strength, Lily's cunning, my own quiet fire. They'd carried me through. The sky outside was bruising with clouds, the city sprawling wide and wild beneath it. I'd won this round, but the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Nate wouldn't go quietly, and I'd be ready when he came back. For now, though, I breathed deep, the weight lifting just enough to let me stand tall. The air outside Ramsey and company tasted sharp and clean, a bitter edge of exhaust cutting through the humidity as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The tower loomed behind me, its glass facade reflecting the bruised sky, a silent giant that no longer held me captive. My purse hung heavy on my shoulder, the recorder and Maggie's letter nestled inside, a twin lifeline that had pulled me through the fire. Lily walked beside me, her heels clicking against the pavement, her silence a steady presence as we crossed the street to the parking garage. My legs still trembled, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaking out in shaky bursts, but beneath it, something solid was taking root, a quiet triumph, fragile but real. We stopped at my car, an old Honda with a dented fender, its faded paint a stark contrast to the sleek sedans gleaming around it. I leaned against the door, my breath fogging in the cool air, and met Lily's gaze. Her hazel eyes were softer now, the hard edges of the war room fading, replaced by something like pride. "You did it," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. "He's cornered. 24 hours, and those papers will be signed. You've got your life back." I nodded, my throat tight, the words I wanted to say tangling into a knot I couldn't unravel. Back. That word felt wrong, like I'd ever had a life that wasn't shadowed by doubt, by the weight of being less than the world expected. Maggie's 12 million hadn't just given me money. It had given me a fight, a chance to claw my way out of the margins. And now, standing here with Nate's empire cracking behind me, I felt the first real breath of something new. Freedom, maybe, or the promise of it. "He'll sign," I said finally, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "He has to. We've got too much. The tape, the records. He can't dodge it." Lily smirked, leaning against the car beside me, her arms crossed. "He'll squirm first, call his buddies, shuffle some accounts, try to bury the mess. But you're right, he's done. That shell company ties him up tight. One whiff of fraud charges, and his whole house of cards collapses." The image flickered in my mind. Nate in his office, pacing that mahogany stretch, his bourbon glass empty, his smooth voice breaking as he barked orders at a lawyer scrambling to save him. It should have felt sweeter, that picture, but instead it left a hollow ache. Revenge was supposed to burn bright, a fire to warm me after all his condescension, his slippery hands reaching for what wasn't his. But all I felt was relief, heavy and cold, like a storm finally breaking after weeks of pressure. I glanced up at the tower again, its windows glinting like eyes watching me go. That conference room replayed in my head. The oak table, the leather chairs, the way Nate's jaw had tightened when I'd said divorce. It hadn't been planned, that word, but it fit, severing him from Maggie's legacy, from me, from the power he'd craved like a drug. The memory of his silence, that split-second crack in his mask, lingered, and I clutched my purse tighter, the recorder's weight grounding me. "What now?" I asked, turning back to Lily. My voice was quieter, the question bigger than the words let on. She shrugged, pushing off the car, her smirk softening into something thoughtful. "You take it. The money, the life, whatever you want it to be. Maggie didn't leave you a fortune to sit on it, Becky. She left it to see what you'd do." What I'd do. The thought rolled through me, vast and uncharted, like staring out an ocean I'd never learned to swim. $12 million sat waiting. Numbers I couldn't wrap my head around. A future I hadn't dared imagine. I'd spent my life in cramped apartments and dead-end jobs, counting quarters and dodging late fees. Now the board was mine, the pieces scattered, and for the first time, I got to move them. "I don't know yet," I admitted, my breath catching on the truth of it. "But I'll figure it out. On my terms." Lily nodded, her eyes glinting with that same approval I'd seen in her office days ago, when this had all started. That's the Becky Maggie bet on. Call me if he tries anything stupid. I've still got a few tricks up my sleeve. She turned to her own car, a beat-up Toyota a few spaces down, and I watched her go, her stride purposeful even now. Alone again, I slid into my driver's seat, the familiar creak of the springs grounding me as I shut the door. The engine sputtered to life, a rough hum that drowned out the city's pulse, and I sat there, hands on the wheel, staring at the concrete wall ahead, the weight of the morning pressed down. Nate's voice, Lily's papers, my own defiance echoing off those glass walls. But it didn't crush me. Not this time. I drove home slow, the skyline shrinking in my rear view, Buckhead's towers giving way to the sprawl of my neighborhood. Pawn shops and gas stations, brick duplexes with sagging porches. My apartment waited, its chipped formica and buzzing lights a world apart from Nate's high-rise. But it felt different as I unlocked the door. The air was still stale, the couch still sagged, but the space was mine now. Mine in a way it hadn't been before. I dropped my purse on the kitchen table, the recorder tumbling out beside Maggie's letter, and sank into a chair, my legs folding under me like they'd finally given up. The letter caught my eye, its edges soft from my touch, and I unfolded it, reading her words again in the dim light filtering through the blinds. "You were always more than you knew." My chest ached, a mix of grief and gratitude, and I traced her handwriting with my fingertip, imagining her at her desk, silver hair bent over ledgers, her quiet strength a shield against men like Nate. She'd seen me, really seen me, when I'd been invisible to everyone else, to him, to myself. This money, this fight, it was her last gift, her way of pulling me into the light. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and sudden, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, soaking into the paper, blurring the ink just enough to make it mine too. Maggie was gone, but she'd left me this chance to stand up, to claim something bigger than the life I'd settled for. And I had. Nate's scheme was dead, his grip broken, and I was still here, battered but whole. The phone sat silent beside me, its screen dark, and I knew it wouldn't ring. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again with his name lighting it up. 24 hours, Lily had said, and I pictured him now, hunched over those divorce papers in some shadowed office, his pen hesitating before the ink hit the line. He'd sign. He had no choice. The thought didn't spark joy. Not really, just a quiet satisfaction, a knot untying itself inside me. I stood, crossing to the window, the city stretching beyond the glass in a haze of dusk and distant lights. Atlanta buzzed out there, a beast of steel and ambition, and I'd faced him, and walked away with my head high. The housekeeper's daughter, the paralegal, the nobody Nate had dismissed. I wasn't her anymore. Not entirely. I was something else now. Something forged in that conference room, tempered by Maggie's faith and Lily's fire. What came next, I didn't know. The money sat waiting, a tool I'd learned to wield, a life I'd build from scratch. Maybe I'd leave this place, trade the peeling paint for something brighter. Maybe I'd stay, turn the duplex into a home that didn't echo with the past. Or maybe I'd do something wild, travel, start a business, chase a dream I'd buried under years of scraping by. The possibilities spun out, dizzying and alive, and for the first time they didn't scare me. I turned from the window, the letter still in my hand, and set it on the table beside the recorder. Two relics of a war I'd won. The apartment was quiet, the hum of the fridge a soft underscore to my breathing, and I felt it then. A release, a settling, like the ground had finally steadied beneath my feet. Nate was gone, his shadow lifted, and what remained was mine to shape. The night deepened outside, the city's glow a faint promise through the blinds. I didn't need to decide tonight, or tomorrow, or even next week. For now, it was enough to stand here, whole and free, with Maggie's words echoing in my bones. You're stronger than they think. She'd been right, I was. And whatever came next, I'd face it the same way I'd faced him. Head on, unflinching my own.